guys, welcome to this little tutorial on how to set up default argument values for functions in GameMaker Studio 2's 2.3 beta. As a bit of a disclaimer, there is actually no official way as of yet to set up default argument values for functions in GameMaker Studio 2 beta, but, and also, there's no guarantee that the method that I'm going to show you today will still work after future updates. I'm expecting that it will, but there's just no guarantee if they make the compiler stricter or whatnot and things like that. So just put this disclaimer. But with that said, let's dig into one way. Let me show you one way that I set up default argument values in the functions. So to help us illustrate that today, I've set this little example here with my little friend Muncher, where I can click on these numbers, and when I click on Muncher, he will spit out the value of the two added numbers together. 5 plus 3 is 8, 5 plus 4 is 9. Perfect, simple little example, nothing fancy. But so how does this work exactly? Well, if I go into my project and go to object number muncher and click on the left pressed, this is where we, the code where we click on him with the left pressed mouse button, he uses this function called add numbers that takes two numbers. In this case, it's the numbers held in these instances called instance number 1 and instance number 2. It takes their number values and it spits them together into the result. Now, this is not a realistic example that you would want to actually use because this is redundant. Why would you make a function just add numbers? This is simply for the sake of this example and not to be a real use case. So he takes this result and he spits it out and shows the number here. So let's just open up the add numbers function and take a look. So here we have function add numbers. We have the first parameter, second parameter, and we just simply take them and return them, adding them together and send them back. Like, really simple, really easy. But let's say that we wanted to add a third argument to this function that actually multiplied the values. So let's say that I wanted to create a third parameter that was actually optional that I could call multiplier. And I'm going to go down to here and I'm going to multiply the result by the multiplier. Now, as you would expect, if I try to actually run the game now, it will give me an error. So it actually ran. It's kind of showing an error here, but it actually let me run the game. And when I click on Muncher now, it's going to spit out an error saying undefined value for multiplier. It's saying that it hasn't been defined. So you could think, well, we only have two arguments applied, so why don't we do this? Why don't we do if argument count equals 2, let's set the multiplier to equal, sorry, I didn't spell that right. Let's have multiplier default to a value of 1. Well, let's see if this actually works. Because we're only supplying two arguments, so this should do it. But when I click this guy, it's still complaining that the multiplier has not been defined. So what's going on here? Well, if I actually just put in the function here, let's do a show message argument count. Let's find out what it's actually returning for an argument count. So when I click on Muncher, it should be 2, but when I click it, it actually says 3 here, reporting here that there's 3 arguments supplied. Well, we only supplied 2. Why is it saying 3? Well, currently, at least for now, I don't know if this is going to change or not, but if we have 3 arguments defined up here, then it's going to at least, as a minimum, return argument count of at least 3. So even if I only gave 1 or 2 numbers here, it's always going to return an argument value of 3. Now, if you go beyond, if you add like 4, 5, or 6 arguments, it will actually begin to reflect that properly. But anything equal to or like below this is always going to return 3. So this is not actually executing here because it thinks it's 3, but yeah, it's just not going to work. So thankfully, multiplier is actually being passed to the script, but it's just undefined. So what we can do is we can actually change the if statement here to if multiplier equals undefined. And I'm actually going to change this just to one line here to make it a bit cleaner. So now we're saying if multiplier equals undefined, then default it to a value of 1. So let's go ahead and see if that works. So I click on Muncher. Perfect. The multiplier is now 1 by default, even though we haven't supplied it, and so it's not affecting the actual result yet because it's just multiplying the value by 1. All right, well, that's working now, but we still get this complaint here, like it's executing, but if I check my syntax errors tab, it's complaining, saying that it's expecting 3 arguments, only got 2, and we don't want this to keep showing up. So thankfully, there's a little trick to hide this. This warning, and we can do that by writing out the top here, if 0, then we can return argument bracket 0. So if 0 is never actually going to execute, in fact the compiler should actually completely remove this line entirely, so it won't even cause any performance overhead. It shouldn't, but because we are technically addressing this argument 0 with the square brackets, GameMaker now thinks that we are manually taking control of the arguments and how we're supplying them. So it actually now completely gets rid of this warning. But as a result, we can see that our parameter help stuff down here is now missing. It's just an ellipsis, so we've lost our like auto-completion helper down here. So to restore that, we're actually going to use the parameter manually created parameters again. So we're going to do param num1, and then param num2, and then param. And then I'm going to put this in square brackets, the multiplier, to give kind of a hint that it's an optional argument. So this is kind of before the beta. This is how we had to set parameters before. And you can still use this in the current beta. But we now just explicitly have to do this because using this method is going to hide the auto syntax helper here. So now if I go back here, I can now see that the help is back, and we now have multiplier showing as an optional argument down here. So let's just go ahead and double check this, make sure everything is working as intended. Perfect. Still working, and multiplier is still defaulting to 1. But now let's actually supply this multiplier in our example here. So there's a third number that I've added in the room called inst num3 number value. I'm going to add this as a third argument. And now when I load up my example, I'm going to press a button here and reveal our multiplier. So now if everything is working, if I set this to 2, 1 plus 1 is 2, plus 2 should equal 4. Perfect. 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 2 is 6, plus 3 is, times 3 is 9. Yeah, so now our multiplier is working perfectly. Now, I also have it, if I go all the way to 10, it sets as an undefined value. So now our multiplier is undefined, and it returns 3, so it defaults it to the value of 1. Just like that, we have set default values. Now, we could take this one step further here. We could actually make all of the arguments in here optional. So I could even do if num1 equals undefined, num1 equals 0, and if num2 equals undefined, num2 equals 0. So now we have it so that all of our arguments are now technically optional. So if I go back into my example, I have it here set up so that like I can actually have it undefined, the first one undefined, and it still works. So it defaults to 0, so 0 plus 1 is 1. And if I add in the multiplier again, I can actually even change all of them to undefined values, and they'll just return 0, and there's no error. All right, guys, so this was just a one example of how to set up default argument values in GameMaker Studios 2.3 beta. If you guys know of like different ways to do this, you can share that in the comments if you have better ways to improve on this, or any if you notice any mistakes or errors in this. Yeah, feel free to share those things. And yeah, so anyways, I hope you guys are enjoying the GameMaker Studio 2.3 beta. I know I've been enjoying it so far. And until next time, take care, guys.